He's here to remind you that you used to love horror movies and secretly you still do. Today, I'm here with author and Hellbent for Horror podcast host, S.A. Bradley, and this is Slasher Sports Cinema.
They will say that I have shed innocent blood. What's blood for, if not for shedding?
I'm your number one fan.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
God, it knows I'm here.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
You're listening to the Slasher Sports Show with Billy Graves.
Something. My dog's just gone fucking insane. It'll calm down in a moment, but
I wouldn't have it any other way.
5 o'clock is just one of those things around here. So doing well, though. Thank you. Hope your holidays are going all right so far.
Hey, likewise. It's been good so far, you know. I like to count the holidays as, the beginning of October.
Same here. Well, September.
Yeah, we like to call it Spooky September, right? So it gives us if we could come up with another name for, August, I don't know, like maybe we could add some kind of nickname to August and extend it even further back. I don't know, the longer the spooky season can be, the better, right?
Yeah, just say you're a horror fan and it goes back as far as you wish it to. That's pretty much how I see it. I do like
to say October 32nd is when Halloween starts. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
And so it's good. Well, thank you first of all for taking the time to come on with me.
No, thanks so much for having me.
There's a lot of things you could be doing on a Monday night, and here you are. So
I'm not that exciting.
Oh no? Okay, well, good. Me neither. So
yeah,
we're gonna
Monday Night
Football. Just fine.
It's about all I can think of at this moment. But even that, I'm not even sure who's playing today.
You know what? I don't know. My team played Sunday, and that's all I pay attention to. I've tried to become more immersed over the years. I just can't find any interest. In other teams. I don't know what it is. I love football.
Mm-hmm. I used to be super immersed. I was an NFC East guy, so I had a hatred for every other team outside of mine. But over the years,
who is yours?
Well, it's now the Commanders. But I was.
You're a Commanders fan.
Yep. It's been a
Me
long.
too.
Yeah, long before they were Commanders, obviously. But yeah. It was always one of those things. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, so being a Commanders fan was a big deal because you were going head first into Eagles country. And so, the Cowboys, a whole bunch of different teams, the Giants, they were big. So I knew a lot about all those teams. But quite honestly, if I'm to be completely honest about it, the NFL lost me for a little bit after the concussion stuff. And some of the things that went along with that. It was just such a disappointment. And of course, I also come from Pennsylvania, and there's a big disappointment that happened in college sports. It's a huge scandal, right? And
Sure.
So those scandals kind of made me go, you know what? I better take a step back. And little by the thing is, the love for the game never really disappears because all I have to do is like turn on the TV. I'm watching a game and I'm immersed, and before you know it, I'm calling offsides and stuff before it happens, and I'm back into it. So the game itself is always fun, but I lost some of the form of the institution. Really bothered me, and that whole big business side of it. I mean, I knew a lot of obviously I didn't know them, but as a fan, I knew a lot of people who off themselves over decades that they basically said it had nothing to do with it. And so, that's the stuff that, anyway, didn't mean to get all loud on that kind of thing. It's a happy occasion. We're talking horror.
It is, but if we could draw parallels between football and horror, it would be the last 25 seasons of Washington Redskins football, would it not?
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. That the only thing that gives me any joy is it hasn't been any better for Dallas. So
Oh, it
as
sure
long as
hasn't. I mean,
Dallas goes down, I'm happy.
Right now though, the NFC East is the hottest ticket in football.
And as much as I hate to admit it, the Eagles are the ones to beat. I mean, they're powerhouses.
Well, don't worry, I'll edit that part out. It's it's all right.
Yeah.
No, when we started Slasher Sports, my partner Christian and I decided, that we weren't really going to cover football, at least not yet. Baseball's kind of both of our first love, so we did that.
Well, San Francisco Giants, right there. So.
Correct. So that is one of my questions. Like, where are you geographically? I've heard Pennsylvania. I've heard San Francisco. You're in the Bay Area now. Right?
I am in the Bay Area. Yeah, I live in outside of Oakland, so I'm on the other side.
Okay. So I guess we could draw even more parallels. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and for about 4 seasons, our AAA Nashville Sounds were the AAA affiliate of the Oakland Athletics.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, Oakland Athletics. And even more parallels, the Oakland Athletics were the Philadelphia Athletics before they moved out here. So Connie Mack and all of that was back in the day. And they still do the same damn thing that they did back in the early 1900s. They sell off everybody. They get the nice farm team people and they sell them off to the Yankees. So,
turn them into all-stars and then offload.
Yep.
It's funny that happened because the day that they announced the Sounds and the Athletics were going to be affiliates, it was probably 2 weeks before that famed wild card game where Sean Doolittle blew the game, wide open against the Royals, and of course the Royals would go on to win the World Series
all the way.
But that was my introduction to Oakland because I did not pay attention to any West Coast, much less any American League baseball, because I was following the Brewers at that point. And of course, we're back with the Brewers right now. But yeah, wild conversation. Did not expect to be talking Commanders football, first of all, in this call, but that's good.
I'm just glad I remembered the name in time.
Listen, I'm not going to edit anything. I have it on high authority. The name was appreciated. It was revered, and now not so much. Whatever, fine. I'll call them the Commanders, but I'm still saying hail to the Redskins, and that's what I'm going to do forever. But today, we've got a good conversation set up here. And I didn't actually previously know you until we met on a site where we kind of match each other up for podcast guesting and hosting. So I looked into your work and I was like, okay, yeah, Hellbent for Horror. This could be a daily listen for me. Oh. And it has been. I've enjoyed your podcast quite a bit. So in a nutshell, tell me about Hellbent for Horror.
Well, Hellbent for Horror is a podcast where I talk about all things horror. It can be movies, it can be books, it can be music, it can be what's happening in pop culture. And I talk about how horror affects our culture and how culture affects our horror. And I talk about things that affected me. And so there are interview shows, of course, but what I really love to do, and I haven't done it enough recently, is essays. I like to take 4 or 5 different movies and come up with one theme and just kind of play with that. And that's always a lot of fun for me. And I get a lot of people who are vocal about what they like about the show. So that's always nice. It's a small group of people, but they are very passionate.
Well, sure. I mean, a lot of times the loudest voices, come in the smallest sections of the crowd. But when you say that you're looking for like an overarching theme, are you talking about maybe social issues or just common ground among those films?
It can be both, but I tend to like going down some of the social issues. So early on, there were things like one of my favorite things was folk horror. Now folk horror is kind of broken out, which is movies that were more about nature as the beast, or kind of the idea of how the old religions used to think of things and if that was real. And so I had a show about that. And then I had one about going up through the satanic panic. So a bunch of things about heavy metal. I think I had 2 shows about that. And then there are ones that I just like. I had batshit horror, which is basically me just talking about how there are some movies that are their own genre and they don't define themselves in any strange way. They're just batshit crazy. And so movies like, I guess Mandy is one, but then movies like Rubber, which is a killer tire that's rolling around blowing people's heads off. So movie, I go in both directions, but there are times when what I like about horror, what I think is great about horror is it can certainly just be you enjoying the monsters and the mayhem that's there. But the monsters are always metaphors. Whether you want to look at it or not, it's your choice. But they are there. There's a reason that you decide to have the movie be where it's a nuclear monster versus a monster that's environmental. Depends on what people are afraid of at the time. You tend to see movies will always be talking about whatever our anxieties are. And so I sometimes find that I like to enjoy movies like that. I like the ones that have the subtext underneath the text. So it's not hitting you over the head with it, but it is always there. And so I find that I try to do that with some of my podcasts as well. So there was one that I talked about what was kind of considered fascism at the time, things that were happening on our historical moment. But I was talking about it through movies that showed just what authoritarianism is really about. The idea of like the movie The Tenant, Roman Polanski's The Tenant. Now, there's no fascists running around in that movie, but it's all about a guy who's Jewish who's sitting in a hotel in Paris and everybody's watching him and everybody hates him and they're stealing his shit. And he is to blame until they drive him crazy. And then I'll have shows that are about, people who think that they're doing well for the world and they're really causing more horror and pain. And so I talked about a movie called Roar, which was supposed to be this happy little pseudo documentary where they had live tigers and everything living. It was like that whole weird hippie idea that you could commune with nature. And at one point, Tippi Hedren and her husband had this place in like California in the valley around LA with I forget how many, 30 lions and panthers and all these animals that should not be together. He had them all together. And so the movie, they're getting torn up and it's like a horror movie. It is a horror movie. The only people who watch it now are horror fans because it was such a wrong-headed thing. But it's them thinking that they're doing something great, right? And there was another one I paired that with a documentary called Tickled, which showed how it's so easy to abuse people once there's a certain level of liberation given. So this was about fetish, and it was about a tickling fetish. But it showed how if someone was diabolical enough, they could blackmail someone completely, even if everything was considered above the board and kosher. So it was really interesting how the way that the person was exploiting everybody was that if you tried to go after him, he was able to say that you were kink shaming. So it was really the guy's doing the wrong thing and he's protected because in a way we're trying to liberate people and get rid of the stigmas. And then you have the scum buckets that'll float in underneath that. So in that way, I like to talk about those things, but it's really talking about the movies. And so there are times when it's just about buckets of blood. And it's just about, you want to see my 5 favorite super low budget movies that were made at the price that it would cost you for a used car. I've got that on a podcast as well. So I love all sides of horror. I love all aspects of horror. I'm a big movie geek. But my heart belongs to the horror movie because I think it's the most beautiful of all the genres. It is made for allegory and metaphor. It tells you exactly when you're full of shit. It will tell you in the way that the movie comes through.
Well, it's funny you say that because it was exactly the point that I made on one of my previous podcasts when we were talking about the film Cujo on its anniversary of release. One of my teammates at Slasher Sports came on. We talked about how, this could possibly be an allegory meaning that maybe Dee Wallace is having to face her own cheating in the form of a giant Saint Bernard who wants to rip her face off.
Right.
And she can't move on with her life until she deals with this animal outside her vehicle. And of course, we had a caller chime in and say that, yeah, Cujo is an allegory, but it's possibly for man wanting to control animals. And he brought up the film Man's Best Friend, which was a Lance Henriksen film.
Yep.
Ali Sheedy, I think, was the female lead in that one.
I think you're right.
Fantastic flick for its time. I think at the time it was probably one of the hottest horrors in theaters. But we've also covered The People Under the Stairs and those socioeconomic issues. Very good job in that film putting together a cast that could, I guess, convey those feelings. And then we talked about They Live, classic Carpenter flick with Rowdy Roddy Piper. Actually was able to, I always love it when I can introduce someone to a film that I love. And if it's their first time viewing it and the first time they view it is because they're going to come on and talk about it, it's music to my ears. But yeah, the horror film is full of allegories, but you can take it at face value and not lose an inch.
Right.
And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. And I love that's what we do this for, right? I mean, I'm in the middle of writing another book, and it's a lot about why we love horror, and also what I think makes horror worth our time, and some of the things that I think need to change in it. But in that, I talk about how horror fans are a little bit different than some other fans. We tend to not feel like we're doing what we need to do until we somehow get someone else involved, and we need to spread the disease. So the idea is we're not hoarders, hoarding information, hoarding how much we love this thing, hoarding the treasures, keeping good movies to ourselves. It's not what we do. No. The people that I basically connect to are the people who can't just watch movies. They're compelled to create in some fashion. Sometimes it's a podcast like this. Sometimes you're making your own movie. Sometimes you're a t-shirt creator. Sometimes you're doing Mondo posters, right? You're doing redos of interesting old-fashioned posters. Whatever it is, we're compelled by our love for this and our fandom to do more than just watch. And part of that, I think a big part of that is we need to connect with each other, and we need to kind of have spread, like I said, that disease to each other. We need to, it's only fun if you give it to someone else to share. Because the thing about a horror movie is it can only really scare you once. The first time you see it is the only time it can really shock and surprise you. After that, it's a thrill. So how do we recreate that thing of which we so love? We give it to someone else, and we wait for them to jump out of their skin. We want to hear the what the fuck. Oh, I'm sorry. Can we swear on here? I think I may have sworn already.
What kind of fucking question is that?
Yeah. Try to make sure. I've had that happen where I didn't ask, and nobody says anything, but then the chat starts to go go up. So yeah, I mean, it's nothing until it's. One of the things I talk about in the book is that it's a rare art, right? It's like a chef. A chef can spend his entire life learning how to take food and turn it into a poem, but it's a useless poem until someone eats it. And then once it's eaten, it's gone, right? So you are not creating anything worthy of being called art until there's a viewer. And so rock music or any kind of music is the same thing. You could sit at home and listen to the song, but it's not the same as going out there and having that moment where you see the person who's actually done the song, and you're surrounded by people who also love that song, and you sing along. These are things that allow us to have this alchemical moment. And I think that horror, you need to share it with people. It's who wants to just be scared alone? That's not what it's about. I mean, I watch a lot of movies alone, but I think the thing is that we want to share this humanness, this vulnerability that we've got. There's very few things as intimate as eating, right? Sitting down and eating with somebody, and there's few things as vulnerable as letting people know how scared you can get. And so I think that there's something very human about that, and something that I think is enjoyable. It's funny that you bring up They Live. I'll shut up after that. But talking
Please
about
don't.
allegory,
Please don't shut up.
talking about allegories, I've been talking about They Live a lot recently because I'm an old guy. I saw it when it was in the theaters. And so I know exactly what the allegory was. I know exactly what the metaphor was that he was going for. It was on the news in every day. So it was the Reagan GOP at that time. You know, it was the right.
Sure.
And it was this idea of how they were creating these yuppies, basically taking people who were at one point somewhat left-leaning and buying them out with money and turn them into these things that were consumers that just let this little thing keep going. So that was the whole thing. It was very satirical. It wasn't like you were sitting there going, but you got the satire, and it was fantastic. It was funny, and it was brilliant in its way. But 20 years later, it's flipped, right? Now, whoever's in charge is what the allegory is. So I know a lot of people who sit there and say, no, it's Pelosi. It's those folks. Interesting. But what's no harm, no foul in that. And it's great to always talk to the emperor's new clothes. But the thing that becomes terrible about the allegory is context. When context is lost, where do we go? So why I bring that up is about 10 years ago, maybe less, the white supremacists got a hold of They Live. And they started using they live, we sleep as their little sayings. They would show the sunglasses coming off, and it was all about the Jewish conspiracy and the bank conspiracy. And they said that there was no more white supremacist film in the world than They Live. And John Carpenter had to come out and say, you guys are fucking idiots.
He took exception.
Yeah, he took great exception to that. So that's one of the interesting things. As great as allegory is and metaphor is, we want to not have the smell of burning tires by being too on the nose with what we're talking about. It is something that we have to have as a cautionary tale. As we spin further and further away from research, we spin more away from the understanding the contextual thing of what's going on. It's very easy for this stuff to be manipulated. This is why you're seeing so many rock musicians and country musicians coming out and saying, you can't use my song for this because that's not what it was here for, and you're just appropriating it in your own fashion. You're taking what it means. And I mean, back when I was a kid, it was Born in the USA by
Reagan, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So Reagan took that.
Didn't Trump take? What was the song Trump took?
I can't remember now. Who knows?
And somebody took exception to it. I can't remember.
Yeah,
exactly
there were a few people. I know that We're Not Going to Take It. Dee Snider came out.
Dee Snider, that's exactly the one.
Yeah, God bless Dee Snider. I love that he came out and said that, because that is interesting, because you always, like, we're horror people, right? I have a thing on Twitter because I have a thing on Twitter. That's where I get so much business, because it just flies by and I get so many fans. It just kind of fall into this stuff. Somebody retweets and it goes all over the place. But I don't read what people say, because I'm of the belief that horror is universal. It's for everybody. There's a horror movie out there for you. You don't have to love them all, but there's something that's going to specifically speak to you. But that also means it's for everybody and it's universal. So I know that there are people who I will not agree with in many, many ways if I get deep down into their stuff. So I don't get deep down into stuff. I believe that you have the right to my horror stuff. But if, on the other hand, you start using Hellbent for Horror, and all of a sudden Hellbent for Horror, instead of the O's, there's a swastika there, I am going to come after your ass. Yeah, and that's it. Because I'm an old Air Force veteran, and you don't want to play Nazi around me.
Facts of the matter. I'm a former Navy guy, so
all right.
Hoorah on that. But you know what? It is a good time for horror film in general right now. I mean, like, you know, no matter what the online forums are saying.
Yes.
You look at Facebook groups, and it seems like 90% of the posts are about a film they didn't like.
Right. I'm talking about that in the book too, which is that we don't unify. That we all agree that it's the most beautiful of all the genres, but that's where our agreement stops. And so I'm kind of deconstructing that, because I want people to realize that horror is not owned by anybody. Horror is the punk rock of cinema. Yeah, and it is DIY. Everybody can make a movie if they so want to. The level isn't so ridiculously unattainable. It is universal. It's where people cut their teeth before they go on to other cinema. But we do have a fucking problem with this thing of thinking that there's either gatekeepers, there's ownership, or that somehow it's being misused now by certain groups. I get that. But I have to tell you, it's always been misused by certain groups, and it's always been used by groups that were trying to push change. I think the thing about horror is that it is always poking at the sore spot that everybody wants to ignore. It is always knocking on that door because it's an exploitation film, and there's nothing wrong with exploitation. Exploitation exploits an emotion. And so what we have with horror is that if you look at any decade, I like to say, if you want to look at it, find out what anybody was pissed off about politically or socially, go to their horror films of that decade, even back to the silent films. You can see movies that it's all about, white slavery, which didn't fucking exist, but everybody believed it did. A young white girl's going to go to the urban world of the urban jungle of New York City. They're going to get taken. And there were movies for almost a decade that were big hits because of that, that fear. And if you take a look, you can see where the fear is. And then you can even see where the fear kind of changes and goes away for a while. In the 40s, the guys behind me, if anybody who's just listening, I have the old Universal monsters behind me, the werewolf, the mummy, Frankenstein, and Dracula. And those guys ruled the roost in the 30s. But once World War II starts, these guys disappear. And if they are around, they're used for comedy because they had a big bad that was out there in Europe that was much more realistic than anything that these guys could do. So for a good 10 years, horror actually turned into a bit of comedy. There were more noir films than there were horror films. And there was more of this darkness that was coming in. In the 50s, once we decided to drop bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we split the atom. Once that happens, we go back to horror real quick. But we have giant ants, giant tarantulas, giant scorpions, all that shit coming out of our thing of nature getting out.
Godzilla himself.
Oh yeah, I love talking about Godzilla because Godzilla and them, put those two movies together, and you can see how two different cultures took the same event and what they got out of it. And one, there was a healing thing, weirdly enough, Godzilla. We looked at it as kind of like a knockoff of King Kong. It's just another giant monster. But to the Japanese, that was like people forget that they were censored. They couldn't even talk about the bomb because MacArthur was there, the army was there, and you could not speak publicly. You certainly could not speak artistically about what had happened in the war. And there was also great shame of what happened in the war. So it took a guy in a rubber dinosaur suit smashing Tokyo. Everybody knew exactly what they were talking about. He's brought to life by the nuclear bomb tests that are happening in the Bikini Islands. That's basically the beginning of the movie. So when that movie was there in 1954, I think, people were dragged out of the audience, out of the theaters, crying. It was an emotional catharsis. They finally got to have something talking about this bit. And I think we all get to that point. Yeah, there's always a movie that just, boom, takes off. And it takes off because it hits the zeitgeist. Nobody knows what the zeitgeist is going to be. Nobody plans that. Just somebody all of a sudden does it. And it's kind of like, that's where it's very punk rock as well. Henry Rollins said, how did punk rock happen? One guy said, fuck you, you can't tell me what to do. And somebody else went, I've always thought that, voice of a generation, I'm following you. And before you know it, you've got a trend. Everybody's just simmering, waiting. And then one fucking crazy person jumps over the fence. And once that happens, it becomes a movement. And so, I think horror is always talking about that shit.
I wondered what the Japanese might feel about the American appropriation of Godzilla.
Oh, yeah.
At times, because we're almost using their tragedy.
Yeah.
You kind of feel like what if the Japanese made a 9/11 flick, right?
Right. That's such a great point because I usually say, think about us making a 9/11 monster movie within a decade of 9/11 happening. Like people would have
People
gone
forget
insane.
that Godzilla was a mere 10 years after the
Yeah.
bombs were dropped.
Exactly, not even. So it's like it's astonishing to me that they had the crazy courage to do that. And I think immediately the Japanese were pissed off about it, because when they Americanized it, they changed the end and they put in Raymond Burr. That whole thing.
Perry
is
Mason
completely different.
himself.
Yeah, Perry Mason's in the movie, and he wasn't in there in the Japanese one. So the Japanese version, Gojira, is really bleak. It's still, I mean, nothing looks super real, but think about the galvanizing effect. I mean, Godzilla doesn't attack LA, doesn't attack New York, doesn't attack San Francisco. He goes after Tokyo. So it is a reckoning, right? You're getting it right in the teeth, the craziness of it. So I think highly of that. And you're right. I don't know what they think. I think the money probably helped. I think just the idea of being able to be part of the conversation for a while. But I guarantee you that Godzilla, the ownership of Godzilla is still Toho. That area,
Sure.
the Japanese want that, and they make that theirs. They won't allow it to be thoroughly Americanized, but I think it's been Americanized. I think we see Godzilla as a different beast, though. I think it's a different allegory or metaphor for us than it is for the Japanese. And I'm glad that almost 60, 70 years later, that is still a viable monster. I always liked Godzilla more than I did King Kong. I mean, King Kong's tragic, but Godzilla was angry, and I was an angry
Another
kid.
great allegory, by the way.
Oh, King Kong, yeah. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
not an allegory we want to look at, right?
No, but it shines a light,
Oh, yeah.
And like growing up, did I know it was an allegory? Absolutely not. But
No.
now that I know, it's
right.
It's hard to not think about it when there's the scene in Inglorious Bastards in the tavern when they're playing the headbands game, basically, and the guy, he draws King Kong.
Right.
And, he wants to know, was he from, is he from a foreign land? Yes. Was he brought over by force? Yes. Was he brought in chains? Yes.
Yeah.
Did they bring him on a boat? Yes. Did they display him for other people? Yes. Oh, then it must have been the American Negro. No. Oh, then it was King Kong. Yes.
Yep. Yep.
Come on.
That's brilliant writing by Tarantino to do that in such a cocksure, hilarious way that really drives it home in a satirical fashion. Whereas if you had somebody, saying that straight out, people would be like, "Oh, that's heavy-handed." But it's so smart. I mean, he does that. I have to give Tarantino credit. I love the whole thing of foot massages that was in Pulp Fiction. The idea that we like to pretend that there's an innocence in seduction, and that things can just be an innocent deal. And he says, do you want a foot rub from your mom? Can I get a foot rub from your mom? It's just freaking hilarious. It's so smart and so clever. And I just read his book, Cinema Speculation, which
I've not read that. And like, I do have a fascination with, his ability to recall certain things from film, and like you can really tell that he's not just a poser. He is a true lover of cinema, and it's not just exploitation. It's not just a certain genre like myself, but he can talk cinema all day long and really never gets tired of it.
Yeah, and I love doing that. So one of the things that I do with my show and what I did with my book is if I believe that horror is just as good, if not better, than any of the genres, I cannot pretend that the other genres don't exist. So in my chapters and in my podcast, I'll talk about movies that are not horror. I'll talk about how Rocky made people feel when I want to talk about Jaws versus The Thing. So I had this one that was called Religious and Sacrilegious Moments in Film, and how somehow Jaws got a pass because Jaws really does just it is gory as hell for the time that it was made, and it was a PG rated film and all of that. But that end is something that is very akin to Rocky. And so I talk about how Rocky came out at a time when all other movies were like bummers. By the time Rocky comes out, everybody loses and everybody dies in every film, down to like action films. Action films where it's just good old boys getting away like Dirty Mary and Crazy Larry. And all of a sudden they're like, nobody's going to get us, stop us now. And the car gets hit by a freight train and explodes and everybody's killed. And that's the end. The credits come up. And everybody's like, what the fuck? We can't even have fun with like a Smokey and the Bandit shit. And so Smokey and the Bandit didn't even exist then. But it was like if Smokey and the Bandit ended with Burt Reynolds exploding into flames. That's what Dirty Mary Crazy Larry was like. And so you had these kind of movies. So Rocky is a completely different thing. Everybody expected him to lose. Everybody's waiting for him to die. Everybody's waiting for some terrible thing to happen. And then he knocks down Apollo Creed, and the entire audience of 40-something men, boom, goes up. So
early in the fight, too.
Yeah, early in the fight, first round, right? And then you're like, holy shit, what's going to happen? So you're like completely, it's just so great how that movie builds. So am I going to pretend that movie doesn't exist? And I think what I'm getting at is that there are horror movies that can make you feel the same way. It can get that kind of emotional draw from you. So I always think that I'm trying to convert somebody that might not be a horror fan and give them some similar stuff. And so I love what Tarantino does. I may not think all of his movies are great. I may not think that everything that he does is gold. But I will say that is a guy who is sincerely in love with films. And
Absolutely.
When I was reading the book, I was amazed how many of his experiences were the same as my experiences. And it reminded me how small the world was when we were growing up, how analog everything was. And that's another thing that I'm bringing up in the new book, which is we were very homogenized. Why what you said resonates with me, that you said it's a great time for horror. It is, but it's not just because it's popular. It's because it is multifaceted in a way that it has never been before, because there are so many different places to find your horror. So I think the pandemic helped a little bit with that. But I think that streaming is one of the hugest reasons. I think just the openness of the internet, the many multifaceted places that you can find movies. Horror is a big, it's the River Nile. And all these different places are tributaries that are letting things run into it. So you have people watching Indonesian horror. You had to be a particular kind of geek like me to drive into Philadelphia and get a video that was in subtitles. Subtitled horror was not anything people were going to deal with. And now people watch it all the time. It's the number one show on Netflix was Squid Game in Korean. Yep. There were several horror shows and horror movies that were up there, if not number one. And
Train to Busan might be the best zombie movie I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, Train to Busan is fantastic, and
not the most important, really but definitely the best fun. Recently.
It's a mix of disaster movie, social commentary, love story, and horror film. So it works really well. It scratches a lot of itches. It's a unique thing, and I think that's another thing that's happening is we have hybrid vigor at this point. I got so pissed last night. I was watching a DVD, a Blu-ray that I bought of an old horror film called The Changeling. Came out in 1980. Ghost story.
George C. Scott.
Yeah, George C. Scott, one of the great ones. And so I'm listening to Peter Medak, who's Peter Hyams, or no, it's Medak. Peter Medak is the director and the producers on there. And I'm loving what they're saying. And then all of a sudden they go, of course, I've never considered this a horror film. Oh, no, it's not a horror film. And I went, fuck you. And I woke up my wife because I was like, this is one of the things that drives me crazy all the time. Drives me insane when people have to run in shame as if we're porn. And so I constantly hammer that nail down, that horror deserves your respect and not your shame. But who knows where I was going.
I won't watch the Oscars until they start taking horror seriously.
Yeah, well, I mean, they have. I think the point now is moot. I think we've conquered it, and we don't need it anymore. And that's another thing that I'm bringing up in the book now is that we don't need it anymore. There was a time when The Exorcist and Jaws and all these movies were up for Oscars, Silence of the Lambs, and they turned Silence of the Lambs into a thriller, psychological thriller. Before it was a horror movie on February 14th when it opened. And then January, it suddenly is a thriller, a psychological thriller, and it kills the horror film for a decade in Hollywood, where everything's just a psychological thriller and a psycho movie. But I think now Parasite won. Joker was up for Best Picture, and we had Shape of Water. So at this point, they can call it whatever the fuck they want. We trampled them. We've trampled that sacred area where horror films used to never be allowed. And I think part of that is because the old guard is dying. And I think that the line between high culture, high art, and pop art has disappeared. Many faceted reasons. Horror would be one of them. Star Wars is another, and the superhero films is another. As those movies continue to embrace our myths, they are whittling away at the people who used to be able to sit there and say, oh, that's greasy kid stuff. There's way too much money in them there hills at this point. And so they're now no longer going with that. But the idea of why I think the pandemic, horror has saved Hollywood's ass every fucking time. When there was a writer's strike, oh my goodness, horror movies suddenly became the vogue because they're just sitting on shelves. They wouldn't do anything with these movies. They wouldn't develop them. They wouldn't put them out. So that's the same thing that happened here in the pandemic. In the pandemic, we had 2 years where there was no movies being made. Everything got put on hold. And boom, where did they go?
And it could have gotten rushed. If it was finished, it got rushed out. And they give us like a substandard film. I do believe, I'll go to my grave thinking that Godzilla versus Kong could have been so much better had they not rushed it out.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many versions of that, but they've been rushing fucking movies out. Carpenter talks about it all the time, why he doesn't direct anymore. He goes, they take more time off of the front, they take more time off of the back, and they make you do it all in 30 days. He goes, who needs that? I'm an old man. We used to have time to make mistakes and then revamp those mistakes. Because now it's just that it's got to be processed in a certain way. I get that. The business is always changing. Who's in charge changes. Are they movie lovers or are they money lovers? It changes all the time. But I think that what happened was horror came to the rescue because all these movies are sitting on shelves. There's all this foreign stuff that they weren't doing anything with. And boom, the streaming services bought those up fast. And next thing you know, these movies that were just sitting in a corner, and they did that when the streaming services first started. I have friends who are independent filmmakers whose movies were on Amazon when Amazon had no product. So very low budget horror films were playing, indie films. And the guys who were making films finally, for once, were able to pay their rent. They were getting good money. And then Amazon makes Amazon Studios and they get an Oscar nomination and boom. They shut everybody else out. They have enough product. They can make their own stuff. They start going towards prestige and horror's kicked out. But the only reason that they're around is because horror was there. And if you ever look at any of the statistics, no horror movie makes Star Wars money. Very few. Some have, but no, it's very rare. But there are 100 horror movies a year and they make $1 billion. They are such as the old guard is dying. And I think that the line between high culture, high art, and pop art has disappeared. Many faceted reasons. Horror would be one of them. Star Wars is another, and the superhero films is another. As those movies continue to embrace our myths, they are whittling away at the people who used to be able to sit there and say, oh, that's greasy kid stuff. There's way too much money in them there hills at this point. And so they're now no longer going with that. But the idea of why I think the pandemic, horror has saved Hollywood's ass every fucking time. When there was a writer's strike, oh my goodness, horror movies suddenly became the vogue because they're just sitting on shelves. They wouldn't do anything with these movies. They wouldn't develop them. They wouldn't put them out. So that's the same thing that happened here in the pandemic. In the pandemic, we had 2 years where there was no movies being made. Everything got put on hold. And boom, where did they go?
And it could have gotten rushed. If it was finished, it got rushed out. And they give us like a substandard film. I do believe, I'll go to my grave thinking that Godzilla versus Kong could have been so much better had they not rushed it out.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many versions of that, but they've been rushing fucking movies out. They Carpenter talks about it all the time. Why he doesn't direct anymore? He goes, they take more time off of the front and take more time off of the back, and they make you do it all in 30 days. He goes, who needs that? I'm an old man. We used to have time to make mistakes and then revamp those mistakes. Because now it's just that it's got to be processed in a certain way. I get that. The business is always changing. Who's in charge changes. Are they movie lovers or are they money lovers? It changes all the time. But I think that what happened was horror came to the rescue because all these movies are sitting on shelves. There's all this foreign stuff that they weren't doing anything with. And boom, the streaming services bought those up fast. And next thing you know, these movies that were just sitting in a corner, and they did that when the streaming services first started. I have friends who are independent filmmakers whose movies were on Amazon when Amazon had no product. So very low budget horror films were playing, indie films. And the guys who were making films finally, for once, were able to pay their rent. They were getting good money. And then Amazon makes Amazon Studios and they get an Oscar nomination and boom. They shut everybody else out. They have enough product. They can make their own stuff. They start going towards prestige and horror's kicked out. But the only reason that they're around is because horror was there. And if you ever look at any of the statistics, no horror movie makes Star Wars money. Very few. Some have, but no, it's very rare. But there are 100 horror movies a year. And they make $1 billion. They are such a big business. And that's why it always cracks me up when they sit there and they talk about, well, no, these movies almost always make money until you overspend for somebody who shouldn't be in the movie in the first place. Some superstar that makes no sense.
Well, Star Wars might have the Joe Frazier left hook with the one-shot knockout, but horror has the Ali punches and bunches.
There we go. Where we sting like a butterfly, or float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. I got the little rope-a-dope. I would say
Sting
that
Like a
horror
Butterfly is
rope-a-dope
my next film, by the way.
There you go. Nice.
No, but you said it though. Carpenter mentioned cutting time off the front, cutting time off the back, and he doesn't have time for that. And just think about what Ty West did. He had to film. He probably didn't have to do it, but he did film X and Pearl. At the same time, just right there on set, back to back, probably used the same budget. Yeah. And he made it work, but that shouldn't be the norm.
Oh, it should not be the norm. And it's huge balls. I mean, it was done once before that I can think of. Wayne Wang. Was it Wayne Wang? I think it was, who made the movie Smoke with Harvey Keitel. And I'm trying to think who else was in it, but it was, basically a small story about one block in Brooklyn and this smoke shop that was there. And it was a really sweet independent film that everybody loved. It was a shock. It was, I think, 1995. And they did Blue in the Face at the same time. They were having so much fun making that movie that they made a second film that got released afterwards, which was nowhere near as good. And it was obvious that they just kind of tried to improvise more stories for this smoke shop. But the idea of Smoke was that that stories are ephemeral, like smoke in the air. What's the weight of smoke was the question that they asked in the very beginning. And so it's all about how we are just connected by stories, but stories are like a good meal. They disappear after a certain degree, but whoever enjoyed it, they're the ones that can savor it. You can never retell that moment. And so it was a great idea. And they just decided to make this second movie. I think they had Madonna, whoever was on the fucking street at the time, came over and started working on it. So it's been done before, but it's super rare. And it's always going to be done in a low budget because there's no way you can do too big. But I stand corrected. We're missing the big one, which is Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings trilogy, they were all shot at the same time. And that was a package deal agreement. And it was the smartest thing that I've ever heard a director do, which is come with a 3.5-hour movie that is all 3 books and give it to New Line. And it's not going to work. But make it good enough that they go, shit, this isn't going to work, man. You know what? Go make 3 movies. We'll find the money somehow. We'll double what you got, but you got to be really tight. What a smart move. That's right up there with Orson Welles doing Touch of Evil, where he was pretty much unreliable as a director. He got drunk and went off bullfighting for the Magnificent Ambersons and all this shit. So, they had to put up a lot of money in insurance for him to make Touch of Evil. He knew that the studios were going to be on his ass. So a week before they were going to shoot, he begged Charlton Heston and the other actors to come together and have a set and rehearse the movie. The big scene where Charlton Heston's character finds the gun or the dynamite in this one room. It's a big for people who haven't seen the movie. It's all about police corruption. One of the first movies to really talk about police corruption, and you have this much beloved detective who's also a racist, basically framing somebody so that he can get away with having a perfect record, and he gets caught because Charlton Heston just happens to be in the room at the time that something changes. Well, he set it up that it was going to be 2 shooting days to do that entire thing. And so he begs everybody to learn all the camera angles. He comes and brings the cameraman. We're going to figure out how we're going to block this whole thing. Because the first day he comes in, and of course, there's all the suits. And he goes, all right, let's do this thing. And he gets 2 days done in like half of a day. He says, we've just taken care of 2 days. And like, okay, fine, we'll leave you alone. They're like, wow, he knows what he's doing. So he planned it to be at the maximum of his abilities. And of course, he had people who were behind him who would go and come in on their off days to figure out what was going on. But, there are these really smart things that some people do. But yeah, it shouldn't be the norm that you need to make 2 movies. I think it's ballsy as hell that Ty West did that, though.
Very.
Because you have no idea if that's going to work. I mean, X is a
huge gamble.
Yeah, it's a huge gamble because there hadn't been a movie quite like X in a while. And I think that's kind of why it did work, because it delivered on the transgressiveness, which I will say the original Terrifier did. And this is going to be controversial, but I did not think that the second Terrifier did. I thought the second Terrifier played it real safe. And
it was a very safe film. They had the one bedroom scene that probably was the shocker of the film, and then the rest of it just played it very, just nickel and dime you to death, and it was a fine film, completely fine.
Yeah,
but nothing out of the box.
No, so I
to your point. To your point, Ty West with X, he had no idea if it was going to work. Yeah. He didn't know that Pearl was going to even be a payoff. And here we are at the end of Pearl. We've got this teaser, this post-credit teaser for Maxine using My Obsession, from the 80s. So we know that we're going to get us an 80s flick.
Right.
Probably another porn star flick, which is going to be great because Mia Goth absolutely killed it. She can do anything she wants to do. I even came home and I said, man, just give me Mia Goth as Annie Wilkes in the Misery remake.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And just let her go. Just let her fucking go.
I like.
But the days of Roger Corman making a film in 3 days is probably over with. With a few exceptions.
I think they're happening out there, and I think that's is an interesting place to take the conversation, because I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen in the horror movie narrative. Or what's going to happen in cinema in general. There's no secret that video games are kicking the living shit out of cinema. That people are not going back to the movies. People are going to certain things that are packaged. But other than that, they're really not taking huge chances on indie stuff. There is some. Pearl and X are exceptions to the rule. But there's a lot of things that just kind of die on the vine. But I think that after 2 decades when 2 generations at least of people who have grown up playing horror video games, where you don't have to be in the same room with somebody and still you're playing the same narrative, and now you're in control of the narrative. There is a spine of a story, but you are making the story go where it needs to go. You're being directed for sure, but you can change what is happening and the pacing and the drama all the time. And that is very compelling. And when you only have 2 hours, I think what you see now is more people are excited by 8 episode miniseries than they are films.
Sure.
And I think people want to have that time to really get lost and immersed in a story, kind of like a video game. And video games have been trying to look like cinema, and now cinema is trying to look like video games. 1917 is a single person, a shooter game. It's an RPG. So you're basically only seeing things from that one soldier's eyes the entire time. It's like the first Resident Evil. I was watching the movie. I'm going, Jesus Christ, this is a video game. This is amazing, and it works. And I think I'm interested to see what your thoughts are on this, because I think that we need to come up with a way to allow the audience to have more agency in the narrative. And I don't know how that's going to work. And if it's going to be that video games are going to be the entertainment to beat in the future, and how horror is always going to, porn or horror. That's the only problem, is that sometimes we are hand in glove. Porn and horror do change technology all the time, and they exploit that, and they are also able to do it cheap. So I think that their horror is going to come up with some way, and part might be these things where movies are being made on top of each other, a package deal of 2 horror films for the price of 1, or
could be
however it might be. I don't know.
Yeah,
but enjoy Mia Goth while we got her, because
when
she's gone, she's gone. Yeah.
Once she's gone, she's gone, and damn it, she will live on in Pearl, and I can tell you that film is probably my pick of the year, and I don't say that lightly. I usually don't harp on the mainstream stuff as much. I've got some very close friends who in the indie scene who are kind of tied in with the Trauma guys.
Nice.
And
I love
so they're doing great things. And there's the Curse of the Were-Deer coming up, Bring on the Damned. My guy Lucky Cerruti's doing short films. I've got some guys coming on very soon who are going to be releasing films in the upcoming months. They've got premieres going on. They're just doing great things. I'm really proud of them. But if we, you brought up the fact that people kind of use horror as the give them the stink face, right? Well, I recently had the director of, I'm not sure if you knew this, but Bring It On, the cheerleading movies,
the horror one. Yeah,
the horror one. I had the director, Karen Lamb, Canadian gal, had her on, and she said that her advisors were like, look, you can do this, but you gotta try to work your way out of horror. Like you don't want to get stuck doing horror. And she's like, stuck? I thrive here. This is my thing. And I asked her about that because her Twitter bio said it didn't just specify that she's a director or screenwriter or producer. It specifies that she is a horror director, screenwriter, producer. And I said, was that strategic? She goes, yeah, I'm a horror director first, and then I'm a secondary director later, because if I have to pick between the two, I'm going to pick horror, and I don't feel stuck there. I think this is where I want my name to be etched in stone, is through horror. But on the video game front, it's interesting you brought that up, because I recently purchased a video game called The Quarry. Okay, and The Quarry is it's a video game where you're basically choosing your own adventure. Okay, you're not really doing a lot of controlling of the character in the classic ways, right? There are a lot of cinematics in this. Okay, you make choices with a button to say what's the dialogue or what's the decision. I paid $60 for this film. Okay. And man, was I disappointed.
Oh dear.
I felt robbed of the money that I voluntarily gave up, because there had been a prior video game called Until Dawn who did this masterfully.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Until Dawn was great, but The Quarry, if The Quarry is any indication of where this genre is going, I don't like it. I don't like it at all. But it has been more hit than miss with some of there's a company called Telltale, and they did a Walking Dead graphic novel type video game, not based on the show, but based on the graphic novels. And I thought it was fantastic. Emotional games. And I think, with the exception of the quarry, we have a very good indication that good things can be done in the video game world with horror.
I
Just
think so.
hell, just the other day, I was talking, or I was playing I really shouldn't tell myself here, but I'm going to. I was doing a little bit of gaming. I'm not ashamed very much. On Friday the 13th, the game on PlayStation, and there's such a mix of people that it includes very young kids. Okay, and this is one question I wanted to get into with you.
Mm-hmm.
I was online the other night. And this one kid, you just know that high pitch. He's there with his pops. He's having dinner. I can hear his dad telling him in Spanish, to eat his dinner while he plays, not to just play and let his food get cold, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm telling him in Spanish, hey, you better listen to your dad, because when it's my turn to be Jason, I'm coming after you and I'm gonna eat your lunch. It's trash talk the kid a little bit. He was having fun with his dad, laughed. It was great. But I asked him how old he was, and he said, he's 11 years old. And of course, as I'm online, I'm going to take care of this kid, right? Make sure nobody's being mean to him or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if we're going to drop horror on the kids, we got to take the extra steps to take care of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they don't become maybe desensitized or, influenced by the violence. Make sure that they know that it's a fun thing. Where do you stand on that with, I guess, do you have a gateway film instead of a gateway drug? Do you have a gateway film that you like to suggest to maybe other parents or something?
Oh, well, I mean,
Gremlins is my go-to.
Yeah, Gremlins is a really good one, especially because so many people don't even think that that's a horror movie. And I remember when I saw it in the theater. It's so funny. It seems like it's innocent now, but when that first came out, there were a lot of upset people.
There sure were.
And the movie was even worse on script. I mean, they had Santa's head. They were kicking Santa's head like a soccer ball in the script. So it's funny to think of it in those terms. But I guess for me, a gateway would be something like, oh my goodness. I'm trying not to think of anything too old, but you did say Gremlins. So
Gremlins and Beetlejuice are kind of two of my favorites.
Lady in White is a really good horror movie, a ghost story. I would say that even though it's R-rated, the Changeling is another good. Ghost stories normally.
Let's go even further back. Nosferatu.
Oh yeah, I don't know if you could get a kid. I don't know if you could get a kid to watch it. Although
I have, and it's beautiful. Yeah,
good.
Both of them. They were 4 and 3. They were, my kids. So if they got up, I just spank them and sit them back down. But I sit them there, and the fact that there's no dialogue,
right,
is even better for them. They don't have to understand what's going on. They just see the shadow creeping up the steps. They see the door slowly open. If there's nothing else the kids are going to understand, it's a slowly opening door to reveal what's behind it. And then a man standing there like this. Come on. That's fantastic. And I think it's the perfect gateway film for
that's fantastic, actually. And you're absolutely right, because I say this often, that horror is pure cinema. And as pure cinema, it does not necessarily have to make logical sense. It has to make emotional sense. Art is that way anyway. When you're looking at a painting, they don't go, can I see your degree so you can look at the painting? No, they ask you, how does it make you feel? That's what they want to know. What does this make you feel? What does this song make you feel? You can analyze it later. And horror is like music in that way. It's like art in that way, that it just doesn't need to be the intellectual thing. It's the feeling. And so because of that, you don't have to know the culture even to understand that this is a horror movie, which is why a lot of people who are immigrants, when they first came to the country, they watched action films, which is why Clint Eastwood and what's his name, Schwarzenegger were so big, because good and bad are pretty obvious in those movies. And horror movies, action movies and horror movies were the ones that people watch because you can learn the culture from those movies. And the visuals are speaking for you. You don't have to have dialogue. And especially something like Nosferatu, because silent films is one thing, but German expressionism is an entirely other thing, which means that everything is exaggerated. So you do have fingers going up against a wall, and that's completely natural and normal. I mean, they're kissing cousins, horror and German expressionism, which is why the first great German expressionism films are all horror films. And I think that you're completely dead on with that. That if you can get the kind of visual images, which is why Coppola's first 15 minutes of Bram Stoker's Dracula is fantastic, because it may as well be a silent film. It has all of this amazing visual lusciousness happening that you're into the story. Once they start talking, it falls apart. But the beginning of that movie is fucking awesome. And I would say that silent films are definitely that. That's one of the reasons that I really liked the original Paranormal Activity, because you could turn the volume off on that thing. You get what's going on. And it's like a silent film, and it's like an experimental film. We're doing all the work. Our eyes never stop moving around that box. It just has that open screen. The camera's still. People are sleeping there. And we are the ones making ourselves nervous. That's goes all the way back to early editing techniques. So it's as good as a silent film in that way. So I'm glad that you do that. Now, you asked an interesting question, though. I mean, there's a gateway thing, but you asked about, what do I think about the violence, essentially. Interesting. I'll go back to Tarantino again. Tarantino's mom used to take him when he was 8 to see all these movies. So he saw the movies like MASH, and he saw The Godfather and all this stuff as a young kid, and he saw exploitation films and murder films, all this crazy stuff. And his mom, I forget what one she wouldn't take him to see Texas Chainsaw because she was not interested in seeing Texas Chainsaw. It wasn't that she the only one that she said that she wouldn't let him see because she didn't know how graphic it was going to be was The Exorcist, and they saw that later. But outside of that, he saw a lot of really heavy-duty horror films and exploitation films and violent films and blaxploitation films. Most of his mother's boyfriends were black, so he got into that culture very early. They all took him to see the movies. And he asked, or somebody asked, why do you let him see all these things? He goes, I'm trying to shield him from the news. The news is the thing that's going to actually fuck him. And so that's the truth. We can sit there and we can try and shield the kids. A horror movie can never hurt you. You are safe from whatever it is. The worst that can happen is you have some nightmares. The idea of desensitization, that's not just a movie happening. That is something else outside that is saying that you can also go here. So I do believe that we're at a time where there's so much saturation, and now that politics is kind of like World Wrestling Federation and all of this wonderful stuff where we can just put shit down all the time, we can be negative all the time. It's coming from all aspects. The easy punching bag is a thing that tells the fucking truth on us, which is the horror movie. Horror movie tells you when we are out of control. When we were having the slasher films in the 80s, slasher films, isn't it amazing? The slasher films come out right after we've gone through the feminist movement, the first round of the feminist movement in the 70s. And we come into the 80s and we're like, God damn it, we're going to, men are men and women are women again. And you have this whole thing. As soon as women start to complain about the violence that are in there, we start going, well, men get killed in them too. Yeah, but men get killed in like, I get a stab and they fall over. The woman's going, oh, no. And this is for an hour while the guy has the knife dangling between his legs. Yeah, there's no difference between the two. But what I'm getting at there is that when the protests started around that, we doubled down. Slashers doubled down. That's a highly political move. That is really talking to the times. And so ignore the complaints of others. We're just going to go and we're going to have fucking fun on it. Now, I watched all the slasher films, so I'm not sitting there saying, but it is where they are telling on us. So I think what's interesting is when we had torture porn, right? So everybody hated torture porn. Oh my goodness, every politician in the world is getting out and telling you about how torture porn is the most disgusting thing, and they're just coming up with this title. They're telling you how the decline of Western civilization is happening because of these fucking movies. They forget to tell you that a year before the original Saw and 2 years before the original Hostel, we had the Abu Ghraib incident, which was where we had people in Guantanamo Bay getting tortured by the military and mocked. Told to stand in a human pyramid naked with broomsticks hanging out of their asses while a guy's going like this, going, yay. And when that happens and it gets out because these morons took pictures of it on their phones and let people find them, they immediately, it's an outrage worldwide, right? And what do? We have Congress, instead of saying, well, we don't get behind any of this. This is a nightmare. Instead, they sit there and go, well, maybe we should talk about what is torture and what isn't torture. What's waterboarding? It's just you kind of bubbling, glugging water. I mean, people do that for jollies and BDSM. All this shit, instead of just saying, we believe in the Geneva Convention because we don't want any of our people to ever have to go through torture like this. And we should not have had that done. And that maybe it's just a couple bad eggs. Well, we already knew that they had written that into the rules. The Pentagon Papers pretty much tell you that they were going to do that. But instead of doing any of that dog and pony show, even of saying, we're against this, at least let the United States know, let the people know that we're not for torture, and let the world know. We instead have a hearing about it. And we want to find out, is it really torture? So we obsess the entire world about torture. Is it any surprise that a year later we have entertainment where guys are tied to chairs getting their legs and arms sewn off? Yeah, it is telling on us. It is always telling on our anxieties.
And it always has.
Yeah, and it always has. So, it's interesting how we love to attack the arts, right? The thing that allegedly is the most innocent thing that you can take or leave at any given time, and you don't give it any money and all of this shit. That's the thing that's really turning kids into nightmares, not the idea that the adults are playing this really crazy game. Yeah. So I think that, we can shelter the kids, sure, if you want. But I don't think you're doing them any favors. And I don't think there's a way to shelter. First off, kids are curious. I wasn't supposed to watch the movies that I was supposed to watch.
That and the fact that horror makes you happy and healthy, does it not? Tell me about Screaming for Pleasure, your book, Screaming for Pleasure, how horror makes you happy and healthy.
Yes. So that is the name of my book. And it's basically a deep dive into all things that are creepy and crawly. And I talk about how horror does not only give you a thrill, but it also can change things into where you can feel a little bit better. And it's not that in other words, I say that it's healing. And it's not going to cure your lumbago or something like that. But I'm talking more about the psychological side of things, the emotional side. And I think that what art normally does. Can you explain why you like sports? Maybe you can talk about camaraderie and teams and things like that, but it's a strange, ethereal thing. Why do we go and cheer? Why do we go in winter and do this thing? Why do we want to see people do things that we normally wouldn't do? Why do we like music? Why do we go to metal and punk concerts and sweat like crazy? Why do we go to comedies? All these things. There's not a really good logical reason, but emotionally, it is doing something for us. It is releasing something that we are not able to articulate. I talk about that a lot, where it's like you could go into a psychiatrist's office and goes, well, what's wrong with you? And I'd be like, blah, that's what's wrong with me. I have no clue. I can't tell you. It's just being alive. It's this constant low-level tension that's happening all the time. And so horror allows us a safe haven for looking at this stuff. I can look at I say that I would not want to watch a movie about the insurrection, the January 6th insurrection, but I'm more than happy to watch vampires and werewolves take over Congress. I can deal with that. So it's talking about it, but it's not talking about it, right? It gives us a safe distance. The monsters are metaphors. They can stand in for whatever the real life boogeyman is that we have no control over. So much of what we're afraid of really is that we have no control. I have no control over the price of meat. I have no control over what's happening in the world. The best I can do is vote. I can take care of my own little thing, but it feels like the world's always falling apart. Horror allows me to address that anxiety for 90 minutes. I get to have the monster be whatever it needs to be. And so for me, when I was a kid, I had a rough childhood. Many of the people who are into horror had a bad first act and they're having a fantastic second and third act because they found something about themselves that was fun. Many of us went into the world of horror. We could address and relate to the Frankenstein monster. You know, dad doesn't like me and I'm thrown out of the house and everybody else thinks I'm too weird to hang out with. You know, that's a lot of people's lives. So we understand the fragility of the way that the monster is taken care of in movies like that. But also it just allows us to have that metaphor work for us, whether we know it's a metaphor or not. When I was a kid at 8, I saw a very esoteric film that has become my first kiss with horror, the movie I wasn't supposed to watch, but I saw it. That changed my life. And I wish it could be something that when I said it, everybody goes, yeah, but instead it's this esoteric art film. And it's Don't Look Now. And the beginning of that movie has the drowning of a child, but it's done very surreally. It's done with many weird artistic flash cuts. It's done out of sequence, and it's done for maximum suspense, and there's slow motion, all this stuff. So it's a child that dies, but it takes 5 minutes for it to happen. And the parents are inside their house, and the kid drowns in the pond in the backyard, right? They're too busy fucking around. And it's all about premonitions and all this stuff. But it completely freaked me out as a kid. I had nightmares for 3 days. Now I get it now why I needed to watch that movie again and why I swore myself to secrecy and never tell my dad that I saw it. It was more what it ended up being that I now know is my parents were going through a divorce. They were pretending that they weren't, but there was so much anger in the house. And I was abandoned pretty much. They were hot on each other. I was just a hockey puck to knock back and forth, right? I was
Sure.
a tool to be used. And that's one of the things that happens when you're a kid. Your world totally helpless. Your world's tearing apart and you have no control over it all. You could die. Your whole destiny's gone. So I'm watching this movie and it's not that the kid dies. It's that parents might not save you. Parents might forget that you're even there and you'll die. And so that was something that I was afraid of. And I had no idea. I could not articulate that. I couldn't tell my uncles that. I couldn't tell my friends that. I sat in dazed silence, barely being able to get through a day at school without falling asleep because tension, pressure, stress, fear, all that stuff. And I watched horror movies and I felt a little bit better because in a horror movie, I can turn it off at any time. I can hit pause. I can get up. I can leave. I am in control. But if I make it through, that somehow feels like I've gotten somewhere. So there's many different ways to have that exorcism. You can do it with sports. You can do it with music. You can do it with art. This is just as valid. And I think actually a little bit better because it goes to this spot that most people don't even want to look at. We don't want to look at that shadow self, which is the Jungian thing that he talks about where you have the persona, which is me trying to be nice and clever here. I want everybody to like me. But then there's the shadow self. The shadow self is the thing that wants to kick over the chessboard at any given moment. The one that says, it's mine. I want it. That little beast that's inside of all of us is there, and it's normal and it's natural. And as Jung says, you have to kind of give it a little bit of space. You have to acknowledge that it's there. Admit that it's there, acknowledge it, accept it. Don't become your shadow, but understand that it's there. And I think horror allows us a safe handshake with our shadow self. It allows us to see something disturbing. It allows us to be surprised in a way. And comedy and horror are kind of the same thing on different sides of the coin. They both want a surprise. Comedies, you watch somebody do something that you could never get away with. It's like a wish fulfillment. But horror allows you to watch somebody go through something you'd never want to go through and survive it. And so there is this kind of catharsis over that kind of thing. I don't just say it's a roller coaster ride. I don't just say it's a catharsis because it's like, what's a catharsis for? You need to know what it's supposed to be there for.
Yeah.
But I think that it's very, very strong once you get an idea of like, man, I'm just pissed off. I can break something or I can watch a horror movie. And some of us are constantly in them because we see not only that, it makes me feel a little bit better. I have a crowd of people now. I'm better about this little shadow self that's inside of me. I also have a sense of humor. I don't take myself too seriously. You cannot watch these things and take it too seriously. If you're going to sit there and get into a fist fight over giant ants and Godzilla, you're an asshole. And yet at the same point, you also find your tribe. You find a group of people that you can hang out with. So, if you're able to handle, some of the stress in your life and have a stress release, you're able to have a sense of play in your life and have a sense of humor about it. And you have a group of friends that you can trade things with, and you get to go into the regular life normal. That sounds like a pretty happy and healthy life to me. So that's really where it comes from.
And this is the subject of some live lectures you have coming up, is it not? Starting mid-January?
Yes, I have a couple. Thank you for bringing that up. I have.
Sure. You said monsters are metaphors, and it rung a bell.
Yes, Monsters are Metaphors, which is the name of the lecture that I give. Basically, several of the things that we talked about here that you brought up and that I brought up are some of the movies that I discuss. So I talk about how through the generations, horror has always been, whether we like it or not, whether we want to look at it or not, whether the movie succeeds or fails, horror movies are always commenting on where we are and what is happening in our lives. And so I talk a lot about the allegories and metaphors, and I look at how from the silent films all the way up, how horror movies were always talking about what was going on. It is not a new phenomenon for films to feel political. You're just on the shit end of that stick now if you're not having fun with it. It's just, looks like the world has passed you by. You better hurry on up and find out what's going on. This is what your parents were mad about. Remember when your parents were talking about slasher films? Guess what?
Right. Now it's your turn.
Yeah, now it's your turn. And it's always been like that. Horror has always been quote unquote woke. It's always talking about the problems that are out there in the world. If you look at Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is one I always love to bring up, because you can see the 3 official Invasion of the Body Snatcher movies, every one of those, same storyline, different metaphor for whatever's happening in the world at the time. But even the first one can be read multiple ways. But the 2 most important ways that it usually gets talked about is it's either an anti-communism film or it's an anti-authoritarian McCarthyism film. Opposite sides. And both sides were right, because both sides, there was a legitimate concern about that. So that was what we had anxiety about. And I think what's great about that movie is that it doesn't pick a side. But boy, is it incendiary if you're on the other side talking to somebody about it. Yet it's a movie that, because it's in the past, we're cool with that. It's something that we've gone through and everything like that. And I don't know if anybody really got super angry over Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because like I said, the giant pod people from outer space. I always laugh because I'll have somebody say, you think movies are about, all movies are about something. Can a movie, you're like Freud, can a banana just be a banana? I'm like, yeah, a banana can be just a banana. You know why? Because bananas fucking exist. Giant pod people from outer space don't. So I'm assuming, if
to your knowledge,
to my knowledge, right? But perhaps they're actually a metaphor, motherfucker. So why are they there? You worried about giant outer space pod people? Is that your big thing? So it's always standing in for something. Even when you said that a giant ate my homework, he was a metaphor for I fucked up and didn't do my homework.
S.A. Bradley, you are a fantastic ambassador for the genre. I truly do appreciate your time today. Before we slide into the gag reel, though, you want to tell everybody where they can find you in your work or like you on your socials?
Sure. If you look up Hellbent For Horror on any of the socials, it's the big ones, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you'll find me. Hellbent For Horror, at Hellbent For Horror on Instagram and on Twitter. And it's Hellbent For Horror on Facebook if you want to go down that fashion path. There's also my website, hellbentforhorror.com. And if you want to find out about the books, that is there. Any of the events that are happening, that's the main place you're going to be able to find stuff on there. Of course, it's all on the socials as well. It all kind of directs together. And I'm at different conventions. Now it's the end of the year, so I've just had my last of the conventions, but they'll be starting up probably again in April or so. And in that time, I usually do around 10 conventions where I do panels and discussions, and I might be coming to your area. You never know.
Well, I'll be looking out for Nashville, Tennessee. So, listeners, check the episode description for all those links to find S.A. Bradley if you haven't already. My man, I thank you for your time. Enjoy the Christmas Evil festivities. Best of skill on your live lectures. And guys, explore hellbentforhorror.com for the latest episodes of the popular horror podcast Hellbent for Horror. Read reviews and get copies of S.A. Bradley's book, Screaming for Pleasure, How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy. And that's going to do it for this episode of Slasher Sports Cinema. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends, support indie film, support horror literature. But as always, go forth and may you drink the blood of your enemies from the skulls of their children.